Hi there. Thank you so much for joining our deconstruction webinar. We're going to get started now in respect for everybody's time, but this is being recorded, so if people come in late, they'll be able to access this as well as a number of other tools afterwards. Okay, great. So welcome to the Deconstruction and Building Material Reuse webinar. I'm going to close off my video camera so you guys can focus on the webinar. We will be addressing questions after this. So we're going to provide a presentation from now until about 1:30, and then we'll have about 10 minutes of questions, and then we'll be ready to wrap up. Okay, terrific. So first, I'll just start by telling you a little bit about the Delta Institute. We are a nonprofit that is celebrating its 20th year. What we do is we work around the region to collaborate with communities to solve complex environmental challenges throughout the Midwest. And what we believe is that this region, the Midwest, can thrive when we work through integrated approaches to environmental, economic, and social challenges. We have a multidisciplinary staff of actually more than 20 urban planners, civil engineers, economists, scientists, and architects. We also have a number of professionally licensed engineers and EITs and lead APs and GIS folks and other folks with other certifications. But we find that a lot of our work requires a multidisciplinary team, and so it's important to have such a strange group of folks. And also amongst our 20 different professionals, we have almost, I think, 20 separate undergraduate degrees. So there's a great diversity on staff as well. So one of the things that we find really important is the approach that we take with our work. We work in partnership with Midwestern communities, nonprofits, private businesses and landowners, local, regional, state, and public leaders, and we also partner with many different levels of the government to help advance some of these programs. And we find that working with our partners, we can identify opportunities for market-based environmental solutions, and we can design, test, and share on-the-ground solutions that yield social, environmental, and economic benefits for communities. And then I just wanted to share a little bit about myself. I'm the Director of Programs at the Delta Institute. I have over 15 years of urban planning experience, and I'm a subject matter expert for waste, green infrastructure, and social enterprise. Before joining the Delta Institute, I was with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, where I was the Director of Environmental Initiatives. I have an undergraduate degree from St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, and a master's in urban planning from UIC. And then for more interesting things, I'm on the board of the Building Material Reuse Association. I have 10-year-old twins, and I am a beginner at jiu-jitsu. But I just wanted you to be able to links after this workshop is that we are collaborating with the Building Material Reuse Association, and we will be sending out a survey which really tackles information about some of the end markets for material salvage. So please, when you get this, if you're in the industry, please complete the survey, please share it with your friends, and we're just really grateful for everyone's participation. So now, in terms of Delta Institute and deconstruction, we've actually been working in deconstruction for about 10 years. 10 years ago, we created the Rebuilding Exchange, which is a building material reuse store. And what we decided to do with that was, after sort of seeing that there is so much material out there and that there's so many people, if they could, who would greatly benefit from accessing that material, we worked together with lots of partners to create that. After having sort of taken a large leap into this business, we started to back up and work with many other groups on figuring out all these other aspects about how do we get building material reuse going in communities, what's required to do that, and what helps that be a little bit less rocky than what we did in Chicago. And so as a result of that, we have facilitated contractor trainings. We've worked with communities on their specifications for demolition and deconstruction. We do market research. We work with communities to select houses and structures that are good candidates for deconstruction. We've worked with people to broker materials, as well as provided project management assistance. So So that is the background that's supporting the creation of the tools that we are putting forth. And then in terms of us, deconstruction is really important, and we'll actually go into a little bit of detail about basics of deconstruction. But for us, it really fits between two of our major focus areas, which include reducing waste and helping communities be more resilient. And so in terms of our waste work, we do work with local governments to adopt policies that foster sustainable waste management. And then on the other side with communities, we work with agencies to create the capacity to engage in sustainable development. Deconstruction really fits right in between those things. And so we'll go into a little bit more detail about that. But for us, when we look at deconstruction, we're looking at it from the community development background as well as waste management. Then today, in terms of what we're going to do, I'm going to provide a very basic overview of deconstruction for because we know that some of you guys are already in the marketplace, and some of you are considering bringing deconstruction and building material reuse to your communities. And then we'll go through the tool that we've created, looking specifically at some of the modules, the background for those, what those tools are, how they work, and who can use them. And then we'll talk about some next steps with respect to how you can move forward with this. And then one of the things I'll say again is that we will, after the webinar, be sending you a bunch of links to things so you'll be able to easily access them. So in terms of deconstruction, as I think most of you know, deconstruction is the process of dismantling buildings in a way that allows for the reuse of building materials. And when we're talking about reuse, we're talking about something that is a bit different than recycling. We're talking about giving materials a second life without being shredded, chipped, grinded, melted, or smelted. So here, if we're talking about a door, we're talking about using a door as a door, or maybe turning a door into a table, but not shredding the door so that it can be something else. We are retaining the same material qualities. And the reason why we think this is really fantastic is that when we work on houses and other structures, we found that in terms of construction and demolition, that a lot of this material can be recycled, up to 70% can typically be recycled, but that up to 25% and sometimes more can be reused. We find that 5 to 15% is going to go to landfill anyway, but this means that there's a significant opportunity to reduce the amount of waste associated with construction and demolition activities. And one of the things that's really important here is that the reuse potential is really fantastic. Here on the left side in this vacant structure, and this picture was taken in St. Louis, I think about a year ago, this is a ceiling where we're sort of looking up and you can see this tremendous lumber. On the right side, you see stacked lumber. This is at the Refab retail warehouse store, also in St. Louis. And so you can see how the lumber from this vacant structure can be harvested and it can be salvaged and organized at this retail warehouse where it can be sold. Here again, we have another picture of stacked lumber, but an example of how this hidden asset that is within this home in St. Louis or in many other communities can actually be transformed into a community asset. On the right side, we have a parklet in the Andersonville community in Chicago. And what the Rebuilding Exchange in Chicago actually took lumber from projects and it created this space that is installed in parking lots where people can hang out, they can have a drink, they can sit with their dogs, but it's a wonderful community asset and just sort of shows how you can take something that could have easily gone to a landfill, but turn it into a real value add, allowing for additional space on Clark Street. So here, you know, just going from left to right, we have vacant homes that have hidden assets. It might be the lumber, could be the bricks, appliances, lighting fixtures, or porcelain, and how those can be harvested and then created and then transformed into new products. All the way on the right side, we have a project that the Rebuilding Exchange worked on in Chicago where furniture was commissioned by this restaurant, and all the furniture was made from things that were salvaged in the Chicago area. So one of the things that we think is really, really important about this is that when you use deconstruction rather than demolition, when you salvage materials from homes and other structures, is that you can really magnify the economic impact of your work. You're going to be looking at more jobs in terms of the deconstruction of the house or the structure. And then that can create more jobs in terms of the transporting, organizing, and warehousing of the materials. There's additional work to be done in terms of the creation of value-added jobs. And then there's the final sale, which provides dollars for all that work. And so what we're doing when we're choosing this route of salvage is that we're creating a lot of opportunities for a lot of people. Whereas when we do demolition, we're typically taking a house down in 1 to 3 days. The house is basically being thrown out, and maybe only a few people are getting an opportunity to work on that. So this really is a fantastic opportunity for communities in the Midwest. The other thing that I like to call out, we get very excited about lumber and creating new products because of the economic impact of that. But deconstruction and building material salvage and reuse provides an opportunity for as a low-cost alternative to a new product. These are pictures from a pop-up sale that we had in Gary, Indiana. And these are all things that were salvaged from facilities in Gary. And you see doors and toilets, plumbing fixtures, lighting fixtures. These are things that if you were to go to a Home Depot or Menards or some other large store, you would probably spend a lot more on. But more importantly, for communities in the Midwest that may have older sections of town, these are things that are more easily able to be used in other houses as you renovate, because the doors might be the same size, the fixtures have the same look and feel. And so it can really, really be helpful to people in these communities as well. And then again, with the value-added products, this is a beautiful table that was created, I believe, by the Rebuilding Exchange. It uses lumber that was salvaged from the Chicago area, steel that they were able to get from another product. So another opportunity that they were working on. So it's essentially something that's almost 100% made from materials that have been salvaged. And that's the sort of thing where there are people who really, really value that, because they really value the story and they want to showcase their values with their purchases. So it's just a tremendous opportunity. And then again, in terms of comparing deconstruction and demolition, one of the things that we really value about it is the tremendous environmental benefits. When you're deconstructing, when you're taking things apart, you can reduce toxic dust from the job site. You can reduce the amount of heavy metal that leaches into soil. As I've noted before, we can reduce a tremendous amount of waste that goes to landfills. And again, we can reduce the consumption of virgin materials by making it possible for people to use these already created products. Additionally, as we know before, there's additional jobs from removing structures. There can be jobs for the hard to employ, specifically re-entry individuals. There's the resale of the building materials and the sale of value-added products. So if this is so great, we need more people to be able to bring deconstruction to their community. When we decided to work on this tool, it was really an opportunity for us to refresh things that we had created previously. This is a picture of the 2012 Go Guide for Deconstruction and Reuse. And one of the things that was fantastic about this was that this is something that we created as a result of our early experience. However, in the last 6 years, we've learned even more, and we've really wanted to update this. And one of the things that we wanted to do was actually to respond to the most common assistance requests that we get. We get a lot of requests specifically from municipalities, from counties, from economic development agencies, and other practitioners. And a lot of this has to do with how do we get deconstruction to really work better within the local government system. And so the goal of this document and the tools within it is to really target the needs of local government and economic development practitioners. So as I've said before, this document provides actionable guidance and tools for municipal managers, economic development officials, land managers, and civic leaders to advance building material reuse in their community. And the other thing that it does is that there is a whole variety of agencies and consultants and other folks who serve these groups. So this is a great resource for that population as well. And then in terms of what you've gotten, maybe some of you have already downloaded the document, maybe you've already looked through this, but there are 7 modules, 3 appendices, and a really good Deconstruction 101. I'll be providing a little bit of some greater detail about some of these modules, but again, it's succinct and everything is very helpful. In terms of the Deconstruction 101, it is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It provides very basic information about deconstruction, interesting graphics, and articulates the environmental benefits and economic benefits. And we think that this is a really good opportunity to use this for, it's a good overview for generalists. It can be used as a reference tool. You can use the graphics, and you can use it as a third-party resource. So for folks who may be making a staff recommendation to a government, this provides you with a document that you can actually reference. And, and again, the graphics that are within it can be helpful because, it looks like something that's been really prepared for people. So this is sort of conceived of as being good for lay people, but also good for people advancing deconstruction in their community. So just an example, this is one of the pages of the 101. Here we have a great graphic which really describes the marketplace, suppliers, sellers, and buyers. We have some good pictures, but there's 5 or 6 graphics in here that are really helpful. And again, the overview could be helpful if you're trying to explain to people what this is and what you're trying to do. In terms of Module 2, this is about conducting an assessment. So what does it do? Exactly what we've titled it. It provides a high-level guidance to determine if deconstruction is a good fit for a community by assessing attributes that we have found over the last 10 years are critically important to the viability for deconstruction. And actually on the right side, there is a picture of some of our friends in St. Louis who are they're walking around looking at housing and looking at those attributes. So this is just one of those things where this is a process that we've used in at least a handful of communities to really think through this. Here I have an example from our work with Cook County where we took some of the factors that we've discovered are really helpful in thinking through deconstruction, and we've used those factors together in a GIS system to prioritize areas where we find either the demand for building material reuse is higher than other areas, and then also looking at the supply. So here, using our knowledge about some of these demographics, we factored housing stock, demolition and renovation activity, market infrastructure, local leadership, factors, green initiatives, arts, crafts, DIY, demographic data, density, and home ownership to sort of determine where are the greatest areas for market expansion. So again, this is just an example about how you can take some of these factors, think through them, and actually look at for your community, whether or not this is something that's viable. And so, there's several. We have additional documents that we can share in this, but this might be very helpful for people who are at this beginning question, thinking through, should we be pursuing deconstruction? Module 3 is about designing pilot projects. A pilot project might be where your community or your county, sort of tests out deconstruction. And we think this is really important because demolition and deconstruction are expensive. They can be, very significant in terms of cost. But also, when this doesn't go well or it does go well, it has tremendous impacts on neighbors and other folks. So we always think that before starting a really big, really expensive project, that it's really important to, do a test with a pilot to see what makes sense. And so, I'm not going to read off the 7 steps to designing a pilot project, but this module has significant information about these 7 different steps so that you can think through, is this something that you and your staff have the capacity to do? Do you need assistance from other people? How might you pursue this? So here We have a picture of the Gary, Indiana Steel City Salvage Advisory Committee, and we've had a deconstruction pilot program in Gary. We're working on some market building tasks within Gary, but this is a picture of the several different departments of municipal staff, workforce development, partners and collaborators, funders, and other folks who are really interested in getting a new home for material, creating economic opportunity, and keeping materials out of the landfill. The other thing that this section has is it has some information about, when you're doing your pilot project, assessing some of the challenges. So if you have one group of challenges, then that might give you some ideas about what additional work or capacities you need before you expand. So if you have too few bids from contractors that you want to provide deconstruction, then potentially additional contractor training is needed, potentially better marketing is needed, but this might help you focus your efforts in the future. So on to Module 4. So this is basically information about preparing a specification for deconstruction services. So who's it for? Anybody who is considering procuring deconstruction. One of the things that we do here is, we provide some guidance and discussion on the difference of process-based versus outcome-based models. We highlight pitfalls that we've observed with deconstruction specifications. And then the other thing which I wanted to share is that Appendix 1 has an example specification from Gary, Indiana, which is basically an outcome-based specification. So I'm going to stop here with that, but we could have a whole several hour-long conversation about this topic. So moving on to Module 5, this is training for local contractors. And a couple of things I want to say here. The BMRA, which is the Building Material Reuse Association, holds the credential for deconstruction. So they are a really great group to work on with deconstruction. However, while you might use them to actually provide the deconstruction, hosting a deconstruction training is a very big task, because you need houses, you need insurance, you need classroom sites, you need to sort of really deal with the logistics so that you can have people actually work on using the deconstruction skills that they are learning. And so I think that this is actually one of our best modules, because it takes the timeline, it takes the key considerations, and it puts those two things together so that you can really think through, as you're reading this, is this something we have the capacity to do? And if we do this, we're looking at, actually we're looking at a long period of time to get this thing staged and up and running. Delta Institute has done 4 trainings in the last, I think, 4 years with BMRA. We've actually been involved in long-term deconstruction workforce development programming, and then we've done other shorter and different types of trainings before. So those were things that informed this module. Here's just a picture from a training that we did in Gary, Indiana. We have workers learning, in the course of the training, they learned 3 different ways to take a roof down, and so they're experimenting with one of the different ways. And one of the things which is really terrific about this is that if you can have foremen and supervisors participate in this training, then those candidates are able to then better manage their staff. And if they receive the training, they can be more efficient. And so that's really better for the business, and it's better for you in terms of the quality of work you will receive. The training, as I mentioned before, is really broken into what needs to happen 6 to 12 months in advance, 3 months in advance, 1 month in advance, a week training, and the post-training period. So again, I would advise anybody who is really thinking about hosting a training to use that module. Modules 6 and 7 are sort of our policy suite. 6 provides a support resolution for building material reuse, and this is something that any municipality agency can have their board of directors or trustees or aldermen pass the resolution. The resolution is basically non-binding, but it does communicate support for keeping materials out of the landfill. So it's a really good sort of first step. And then Module 7 provides detail on several different ordinances from all over the country. So in terms of Module 7, there are many different policy approaches for encouraging building material reuse, salvage, and increased recycling. And so what we've done with this module is sort of summarize several different things that people are doing, and and we look at what geography it's in and what the specific policy mechanism is for encouraging salvage and reuse. But typically, one of the things which is interesting about the policy is that policies really are very diverse. Some of these policies focus on building a team or advisory of interested parties to lead this. Some of this focuses on how deconstructions can be publicly or philanthropically funded. Some of these things create basically a supportive regulation backbone that requires a certain amount of reuse. There's examples of where policies simply go to clarify processes for groups. Some of these include subsidized deconstruction training. Some of these create basically bumps for groups who agree to use re-entry workforce partnerships. So if somebody's bidding but they have a partnership with a workforce trainer, they may get more points awarded to them as they're bidding a project. Additionally, policies can help with the recognition of good actors and identify specific junctures for enforcement. So here I'm just going to pull up this example from Cook County. Cook County has a tremendously effective ordinance. It's called the Demolition Debris Diversion Ordinance, and it requires that a certain amount of waste is recycled, and it requires that a certain amount of waste is reused. And they do this using their building permit. And so one of the things that this does is it requires people to submit a certain number of documents and plans before they get the permit. And then after the permit, they have to resubmit information to close out the work. But here, one of the things that we did with them was to sort of look at visual ways to help people understand how to follow the process. But again, identifying specific junctures for enforcement is really important. And then again, I just want to talk a little bit about the program specifications. In Appendix 1, we have the City of Gary specs, but there are other specs available. We also have a really helpful table from the Breaking It Down, Demystifying Deconstruction presentation. This includes indicators of strengths and weaknesses for deconstruction, looking at funding, pilot program size, local markets, and workforce development. And then finally, we have a material salvage form. So I'll just showcase the material salvage form. Oftentimes, one of the things that we find is that you have to know a lot about the houses and structures that you are going to identify for them to be part of a deconstruction. And so we've worked with several communities to create different approaches to identifying these houses. But before actually bidding the work, it's often very helpful to have people visit the house, collect some information, the size of the house, when it was created, when it was built, certain attributes, and then look at certain, the wood that's in the house, as well as other factors. This house is actually is interesting because it actually did not have a good group of lumber for this, but there were a ton of building materials that were brand new, but were just inside the house. So this provided us with an opportunity to make sure that before somebody took a backhoe of the structure and then threw everything out, that a lot of the materials could be salvaged. The other thing we do here is we identify site hazards that may complicate things. There's a lot of homes in blight programs that have a lot of exterior trash or interior trash, trees and foliage, and so when you have a complicated site, some of those things can create insurmountable barriers. So here we try to make sure that we're calling out hazards and that we're able to make sure that people are aware of that in their prioritization. The other thing that conducting site assessments does is it allows you to have your practitioners out on the street talking to people in communities. And this does a world of good for all programs. It's always great to talk with people and for people to feel that folks who may be working on a project are out there and available. This is a picture from Joliet, Illinois, and I'm actually on in part of this picture. We had a gentleman who was a neighbor to this house, and he was able to give us the whole fascinating history behind this amazing house. And one of the things that was a real takeaway for me was that you know, he was really excited about the work that we were doing because it was going to take care of a structure that was, you know, vacant, that was bringing down the neighborhood, but that would also, you know, provide an opportunity to help the materials in the house sort of live a second life. And so one of the things that we joked about with him about was that this is our first sort of Humans of Joliet picture. So if you're familiar with that, Humans of New York is a really popular series where folks from New York share things about themselves. But anyway, the other thing that I wanted to share is that this is a picture of one of our staff members, Martin Brown. This is from Gary, Indiana. We had been looking at literally hundreds of houses. And this is a house where on the outside, it doesn't look great. You know, there's many, you would look at this and think, oh, well, what could possibly be here? But we found there's a tremendous amount of high quality lumber and other you know, elements of architectural salvage. And so you can see that Martin is giving us the enthusiastic thumbs up for including this in the deconstruction program there. So with that, I'll say that developing a deconstruction program is challenging, but it has the tremendous potential to mitigate negative impacts from blight and to maximize opportunities for, especially for residents who may have been disproportionately affected by the blight. So with this, it's not easy, but there's a tremendous amount to be gained from that. In terms of, I think, again, things that we do, Delta Institute works closely with communities to help them get deconstruction and building material reuse initiatives going. One of our goals with this tool was to provide a lot of information so that people could do more on their own, but also know that we're still here and we want to provide assistance. And again, there may be things where the tool gets you part of the way, but more information is needed. And we really invite everybody here and anyone who's interested to reach out to us if they have, you know, interest with any, you know, questions about the tool, but also interest in any of these services too. The other thing, just sort of harken back to an earlier part, you know, Delta Institute is comprised of 6 different initiative areas: resilient communities, sustainable buildings, waste reduction, but also green infrastructure, land stewardship, and regenerative food systems. One of the things that we really like about the deconstruction initiative is that it really is like the nexus of resilient communities, sustainable buildings, and waste reduction. You know, it can be a critical role in a community resilient economic development plan. It can reduce waste, but also it can provide the salvage materials that can enable people to achieve LEED certification or other accolades with their other buildings. So then the other thing I just want to remind everybody is that you can access our free tools at delta-institute.org. Then /tools, and you'll find that if you go here, you'll find that not only is this tool available, but the 2012 Go Guide on Deconstruction is also available, along with a number of other resources, many of them about our other subject matter areas. So with that, we will open things up to questions, and I'll invite Amy, my colleague, to sort of explain how we're going to do questions to kind of make sure it works. And we'll also turn on video too.
Hi, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to message us in your chat. We're happy to receive, or of course, email us afterwards if you're interested in asking questions after. But we are so glad that you were able to attend today. And if there's any specific questions, yeah, just shout them out in the chat box. Eve, are there any particular questions that you've gotten regularly on these topics that you might want to share?
Sure. One of the topics that I've received a lot of questions about really has to do with the contractor training, and I think that it's really important to acknowledge that training can be thought through in a number of different ways. Contractor training can be focused towards a foreman who is going to manage workers who are going to do deconstruction. It can also be part of a workforce development initiative where it is creating primary skills for people who are, seeking employment. Additionally, and this is something I think is really important, is that some level of training can be very helpful for any group of people who is actually in charge of the bidding, specification, and oversight of deconstruction. And so one of the things that we try to do with the specification tool was to sort of provide a little bit of information about how you might think through that, as well as how you might meet those training needs so that when you're investing in training, you're getting the outcomes that you seek.
I know we have a lot of really great graphics that are worth sharing and just taking a look at, but are there any graphics in particular that you would recommend people share with their peers or?
Yeah, that's one of those things where one of the goals with this tool is to sort of give people who are interested in this some of the resources they might need in terms of, how are they going to either communicate with others about the program they want to run? Are there people that they need to persuade? Are there other folks that, if you give them a long, wordy, definition of what they're doing, they're just going to kind of crash out and give up. So one of the things that we found very effective is that picture of the house with the 15% that's going to get landfilled and the amount that'll get reused. That's actually that's really helpful, and that you can use that. There's also a picture that it's sort of a graphic that compares number of employees used in demolition versus deconstruction. That also really works very well. So we actually do have a question, so we will turn to that one. So the question from Lauren is, and I don't know if everybody can see this, is how developed has the supply chain of these reused materials been in your area? Is it a build it and they will come, or has Delta Institute experienced difficulty in actually getting materials into the market? So it's a great question because there's a lot of different approaches to this, and it kind of depends on the players that you want to work with. So I like to actually think about who in your local area could be a purchaser or a user of the product before we get started. So one of the things that we didn't do this to begin with. This is something we learned, I think, about 5 years into this, because before we're like, we'll get the materials and people will love it. But instead, what we found is that it's really important to have an idea about how can we actually get, who could be a purchaser, and in a pilot program actually trying to get those people to purchase or buy or accept the materials. The other thing that we found is that if you're willing to look beyond your local market, there's a lot of buyers. But many of us, because of our desire to keep materials local, really want to keep the materials in-house. But I know from many folks that that if you're in the Midwest, you can sell into the Chicago market, you can sell to California, you can sell to people in Baltimore. So it kind of depends on, how much capacity people have to do that. But, there's just a lot of different ways to think through that. The big thing is really about looking at market worthiness. So I think that if you have high quality brick and that brick is something that's market worthy, it's going to sell. And if you have good lumber, that's going to sell. And then some of the other things like, toilet bowls and cabinetry, that can be a little bit harder, but there can be markets for that. So we also have a question from Kevin Fogel, which is, what are our thoughts on an all-encompassing deconstruction ordinance versus a building material diversion ordinance? So that's a great question because throughout the country, people are doing things differently. So, one city has decided that all structures built before a certain date have to be deconstructed. We've worked with cities where, they have a diversion ordinance. I think that I think that they actually, it's really a local question. What was their political appetite for? So, and then also, what's the housing stock? So if you have an area that has a lot of housing stock, that it predates 1950, there's, probably a lot of material value that could be salvaged. If you have another area where you have a variety of different ages of housing stock, then it's really unclear what type of material you have. And it also really goes to, what's the end point of the ordinance? If the ordinance is just recycling or diversion, then a diversion ordinance is going to do that for you. And there are several across the country ranging between 50 and sometimes up to 80%. So it kind of gets at, what are you trying to get done? But if you have, and also political willpower. So if you have somebody who's willing to carry a really stringent ordinance, that could be good. At the same time, it also goes to what's enforceable. So in terms of policy, there's just a lot to consider with that. We are very much aware of places where they have a very aspirational ordinance, but basically almost no capacity to actually implement it.
Any other questions? I think I have another, if no one else does, feel free to message, though, of course. My other question was, obviously, Eve, you have lots of experience all over the Midwest and these areas. Is there any other story that you'd love to share about, something that's happened as of late or in the past?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we find when we do a deconstruction training, is a fantastic opportunity for communities who don't know what you're talking about to get involved and to actually see this. And when we've had trainings and we've invited media and neighbors and other groups, people do stop by and they want to know what's going on. They're just fascinated by it. And there is a really palpable aversion to waste. So the idea that you are keeping waste out of the landfill, even for folks who don't identify as being terribly environmental or green or progressive or liberal or what have you, really like that. And the other thing with that is that giving people an opportunity to kind of see what you're doing is helpful. So I think that the last time we did a really big training, the number of times we had contractors just sort of drive by and just kind of want to stop, and they were kind of saying, "Oh, I wish I was doing this," and and it's and of course we want to repeat training so that we can get those people in, but there's definitely a lot of opportunity. So what are your okay? So we have a. Are you currently planning any trainings in the Midwest? So that's I think that I've heard that there's interest in trainings in there's different types of trainings. So my understanding is that there is definitely some discussion of trainings in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area, as well as I think in the St. Louis area. These trainings, I believe, are going to be probably sponsored by organizations that are seeking to achieve very specific goals. So it may include the BMRA credential, it may not, I can't really say, but I'm sure that some of it will include, the physical deconstruction, project planning, getting materials to market, safety, and the other really critical things. I think that one of the things that is really important to also consider is that even as there's these very specific trainings, there are several organizations throughout the Midwest who have building material reuse programs for workforce development. So a great example would be Better Futures in Minnesota is a social enterprise where they have one leg of the business is doing deconstruction, and those are folks who are traditionally hard to employ, and then another leg of the business has to do with running their retail warehouse. So in addition to the standalone trainings, there are groups throughout the Midwest who are sort of continually developing workforce to do deconstruction.
So we have about 5 minutes left. So if anyone has any, last minute questions, feel free to message them now. We did plan internally just to finish finish early rather, just to respect your time. And we always love getting back an extra 10 minutes in our day. So we thought you might appreciate that too. So if you have any other questions, feel free to message them in now. But we really appreciate the time you took doing this today, and we should just move to the slide where Eve's contact information is, just so you all have access to that. Oh, there we go.
Sure. So there I am in a different picture, but you know, please, email is definitely the best way to reach out. So definitely reach out if you have questions and ideas. The other thing is that if you do use the tool and review it and start to think through, okay, how might we use this in our community, or it would be really great if it had this and it doesn't have this, please let us know, because that's the sort of thing where you know, just as it took us a long time to finally update the other Go guide, it's always better when we're hearing, you know, firsthand. You know, it would be really helpful to have a table that had this information. Well, then you know, it's not a really big deal for us to add a couple components if they'll help you. So please do reach out.
Not seeing any other questions come through, but if you do, feel free to just reach out to Eve via email, as she said, and we'll give you another 4 minutes back then. But thank you so much for your time today, and we hope this is of assistance. And we plan to offer another webinar on this topic potentially in the late fall. We will be sure to keep you updated. It'll be on our social, on our website, and we'll definitely try to reach out. And so feel free to, you know, share that when it comes with your colleagues or friends that, you know, you might think would benefit from this as well. But thank you for your time today. We'll say goodbye.
Great. Thank you.